Hello, and thank you for joining us for this fifth day of the sixth Mission Innovation Ministerial. And I also like to thank Chile and the Ministry of Energy for hosting this year's ministerial. My name is Vanessa Chan, and I'm the Chief Commercialization Officer at the U.S. Department of Energy. In this role, I also serve as the Director of the Office of Technology Transitions, where our mission is to expand the commercial impact of the research investments of the department. As such, we're responsible for overseeing delivery of the DOE strategic goals for technology commercialization, which entails streamlining access to DOE's national labs and fostering partnerships with the private sector to move solutions to market. I'm thrilled to be in this role, having spent the past few decades helping to commercialize technologies around a wide range of ecosystems, from big private companies to startups to academia. As such, I am thrilled about today's panel, which is on navigating the innovation labyrinth. We're going to hold a conversation on the long and difficult journey of commercialization, one which often begins with an idea at a lab bench, and hopefully ends with a technology that changes our world for the better. As you all know, innovators face significantly different challenges along this journey. And if we're to be successful in the fight against climate change, we must play an important role in shepherding them towards success. I'm thrilled to have with us today two people who have been experts at navigating the complex innovation maze. Jamie Hinman, CTO of Deere & Company, and Robin Milliken, Director of U.S. Policy and Advocacy at Breakthrough Energy. I'd like to welcome each of them to share their backgrounds and why innovation is important to them. Jamie, why don't you start?
All right, thanks, Vanessa, and it's my pleasure to be here today. I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to do the virtual fireside chat, and I love the mental imagery of this idea of the innovation labyrinth. I love what that conjures up. I think it speaks to the problem really well. So my name is Jamie Hinman. I've been with John Deere for 25 years. I've been very fortunate to have worked for the company for quite a period of time. I've worked on both the construction as well as the forestry and agricultural parts of our business. And I get up in the morning to develop solutions for our customers. Most of my career has been in product development. But that's really what gets me going in the mornings and what keeps me coming to work every day. And I love developing those solutions and seeing them impact our customers in their businesses to make them more profitable and more sustainable. And I currently have the great honor to serve the company in the position of Chief Technology Officer, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation today. Vanessa?
Perfect. Robin, can you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thanks, Vanessa. Well, first of all, I'm delighted to be here and to be part of this sixth Mission Innovation Ministerial. Breakthrough Energy and our founder, Bill Gates, have been deeply involved with mission innovation since the beginning. And it's really amazing to see how much it's grown and evolved over the past 6 years. In the way of background, for those of you who don't know us, Breakthrough Energy is an organization that was really founded and built around the idea that we need to innovate both quickly and at sufficient scale to get to net zero by 2050. To do that, we'll need technology, markets, and policy to all come together to achieve that goal. At Breakthrough, we're building exciting new programs that tackle barriers at each stage of the life cycle of innovation, from research up to commercialization, working with governments around the world, including those involved at Mission Innovation. At Breakthrough Energy, I lead our work that is focused on clean energy innovation policy in the United States, working deeply with people like you, Vanessa, at the Department of Energy and elsewhere to ensure that we increase our ambition and ensure that we're focusing on the most important challenges ahead of us. I'm personally very passionate about the mission because innovation is a very positive force that I believe has the ability to unite us and bring out the best in us. We saw this in action recently on the U.S. side when in December, the U.S. Congress passed a sweeping bill to increase funding for clean energy technologies, which was the biggest in almost 15 years, despite the very polarized environment where it can often be difficult to do anything. One also has to think about leveraging the strengths of both government and companies that ultimately have to commercialize technology, which is why I'm very excited to join this panel today with you, Vanessa and Jamie, because it'll be very interesting to hear from you what you think the greatest challenges and opportunities are that lie ahead of us. Thanks.
So Jamie, I like the way you kind of had a visual around this innovation labyrinth and all of us are trying to navigate around it. And, Robin, the breakthrough agenda is a really ambitious one, right? In order to help the planet reach zero carbon emissions through innovation. And that is not an easy feat because that's a big problem. So what are some of the biggest challenges that you see to navigate these really complicated ecosystems? And what is Breakthrough doing to actually address these challenges?
Well, fundamentally, I think when you boil it down, the biggest challenge is that we're talking about transforming the entire physical economy. And that is true not just in the United States, where we are, but also in the many places that are growing and want the same standard of living that we've enjoyed. So to me, if we look ahead, that means that we're going to need clean solutions from everything from power to agriculture, and that those solutions also have to be affordable enough to be used everywhere and in a very short time frame. So it's a massive challenge with many different actors, many different stakeholders, and depending on what problem you're trying to solve, you could be talking about dealing with lots of different elements. So I think the term innovation labyrinth really is an apt one in that regard. Our approach at Breakthrough Energy, recognizing all of the different facets of the problem, is to really think about this in an integrated way. To us, it's a three-legged stool where you have to tackle policy, markets, and technology together, or else it doesn't work. For technology, we have programs at Breakthrough Energy, like our Fellows program, that are really focused on providing support and giving a runway to early stage innovators so that they can get access to resources and facilities to help them turn what might be a really great, promising idea into a useful product or company. Once that technology is ready, then we have programs like our Breakthrough Energy Ventures investment fund that is really oriented toward helping companies with promising transformative technologies grow and scale up. Then when a company is ready to build their first project, we have programs like Breakthrough Energy Catalyst that will provide low-cost financing as well as grants to help them do that. And across the entire life cycle, of course, we're also working on supportive public policy that can ensure that technology and projects are deployed into an environment where they can be successful. And that includes both having resources at the early stage and as also having market shaping policy at the later stage to ensure that they can scale up. In each of these programs, we'll need to partner with both governments and the private sector to ensure that we're successful. So I'm really hoping that Jamie can comment on how he sees this working from the perspective of being at a major multinational company.
Yeah, thanks, Robin. I think you did a great job of describing sort of the complexity of the problem. I might unpack it a little bit at a customer level using Deere's agricultural business maybe as a proxy. And if we think about growers in the agricultural space, customers of Deere equipment and sort of what stands in their way from making their operations more sustainable, it really involves often a need for customized and tailored solutions to their individual operations. Said differently, the solution that we might offer for a grower in a corn or soybean rotation in the Midwest part of the United States is very different than the solution that needs to be offered for a small claims holder in India or in Africa, as an example. The technology, the price point, what's important to that grower, and how that technology can improve their business is all different, and it's different based upon the application. It's different based upon the geography. One thing that's not different is their desire to be sustainable. Every farmer depends upon the land. They know they depend upon the land, and they want to make sure that they take care of what is their most valuable resource. So our challenge as a company is really to take what is a very complex global agricultural production system and break it down and provide solutions that are tailored to fit the different constituents within that global system, and improve the value that they experience within their business as a consequence.
And so, Jamie, you're the chief technology officer, right? And Robin just described this three-legged stool. I love all of the visuals we have on this panel, right? And so there's policy, technology, market. And so talk to me a little bit about, how the CTO role has kind of evolved as you're trying to navigate this complex labyrinth. Are things, on policy becoming more prevalent? How do you talked a little bit about the market needing to customize solutions. How are things evolving on that three-legged stool and the way in which you guys tackle these big problems?
Yeah, I think certainly, Vanessa, I think policy has a role to play, right, in this. It can be a macro driver of changes in the marketplace that are super helpful for accelerating the pace of change. It provides I would say a sense of comfort and a bit of a support network for the industries that need to go through this transformation. And it's a vital piece of I think the total puzzle of enacting change in this space that makes it just makes it tractable for both the market and for the providers of the solutions to that market.
One of the things that's exciting for me right now in terms of the timing of when we're trying to tackle the climate agenda is it's not just policy that's being set around this, but we're seeing people like chief sustainability officers are now real roles in big private companies. We're seeing companies starting to raise their hand, like, hey, we're making these commitments. And oftentimes they don't have the line of sight of how they can actually get there. So Robin, talk to me a little bit about, breakthrough. And as you look at these big, bold moves being made in the private sector with claims of, we're going to get to these types of goals by a certain date, but quite frankly, many of them don't know how to get there. What are things that you're doing to help them navigate the complexity around trying to achieve some of those targets?
Yeah, I think that, there are a few different things that are, important in this regard. I think, first of all, is identifying the role that companies can have, right? Because I think there's a sort of outdated view that some hold that, companies are just the sources of, money for these things. But in reality, there's a lot of different, productive roles that we see, the private sector playing. Companies, for example, are buyers of innovation, right? So they can use their own internal, procurement policies to buy clean materials for infrastructure projects and buildings or fuels for their fleets. They are also, of course, suppliers of innovation. So companies can, invest in their own research and development to ensure that they're providing a pipeline of technologies to the marketplace, and also, can work with smaller companies, through acquisitions or, direct investments to ensure that, great startups are supported. And then lastly, of course, companies can also be investors in innovation, by funding projects like what we hope to get off the ground at Breakthrough Energy Catalyst. So there are a lot of different productive roles that companies can play. I think the challenge is really identifying, how do we get together and, get organized around the highest, priority challenges, because there are a lot of different possibilities. There are a lot of different stakeholders, as we talked about earlier. So, what we hope to do at Breakthrough Energy is really provide an organizing framework around what do we need to focus on. So we have this concept called the green premium, that is essentially the difference between an incumbent, carbon emitting product and a clean alternative. And Mr. Gates, who pioneered this concept, really thinks about it as a useful mental model for understanding how close or far away we are from having a clean alternative. So we're hoping to provide that framework as a way for, us to organize around partnerships with industry to say, okay, if we really know that we're pretty far away from having good solutions for things like steel and cement, let's work together on that challenge through things like our Breakthrough Energy Catalyst program. So the organizing framework and strategy is one piece of it. I also think it's really important to have platforms that allow us to network together. So I think that's the great thing that Mission Innovation has really done over the past 6 years, is bring together governments and the private sector increasingly around specific challenges to say, let's work together. So I think, the strategy and organizing frameworks are a big piece of the puzzle that we need to address.
So this idea of the green premium is a good one. If you talk to consumers and others, they are all about sustainability, but if you want them to spend more money, it's a little bit more of a challenge for it. And so Jamie, talk to me a little bit about, your constituents and, how do you convince them that sustainability is an important thing to do? How do you help them, especially if it might cost a little more money for those solutions? And are there ways in which, you're thinking about trying to tackle a little bit of that tension behind sometimes sustainable solutions may cost a little more than the existing solutions, which are not sustainable?
Yeah, so we think about it, in the context of our customers' business frequently, and maybe I should take a step back and touch on a point that Robin made about companies trying to be net zero. We also aspire to be net zero within the four walls of Deere, but we also recognize that our impact on global sustainability is far more reaching when we can impact the lives and the businesses of our customers across global agriculture than just our own business. So we talk about it in the context of net zero and net zero plus being the impact that we can have with our customers. And to your point, Vanessa, every customer is worried about the economic viability of their business. And so in the ag world, that's often thought of in the context of all the inputs that they have to put in to their production versus the output, how many bushels of corn or beans or cotton bales, whatever they might produce at the end of a growing season. And so it has to make economic sense for them in the end. And so what we are focused on is trying to put technology into their hands that enables them to make a better business in the end. A good example for that in our space would be a technology we call See and Spray. It's using computer vision, machine learning algorithms in order to sense in a large scale agricultural operation what weeds are and what crop is. And today we broadcast spray chemical across the complete field. Not a terribly sustainable operation. See and Spray enables us to spray only the weeds, right? And so from a customer's perspective, they pay more for the technology, but it ends up reducing their overall input costs. They pay less for the chemicals and they have to spend less time in the field, et cetera, and so on. So the economics work for their business. They're willing to invest in the technology because it's better for their business. At the same time, it's better for the environment. It's a more sustainable approach to agriculture. And so our efforts are aimed at trying to figure out what those win-win-win technology opportunities are and then make them as available as possible and as quickly as possible so that we can all recognize the benefit.
I love that approach because I think oftentimes people just focus on the technology and the cost of it instead of the entire ecosystem costs, right? So if you're looking at the end-to-end solution and really asking yourself, what does this mean for the business model of the farmer? That is a better way to be thinking about it. And to your point, Jamie, there's nothing more important than the land that we're farming. So if you can help your customers, then we absolutely be helping to drive towards sustainability. One of the things that's interesting is, climate is a global phenomenon, right? And, it's not such that, if you are doing things in the US, it stays in the US, it affects the entire globe. And anyone who's taken middle school science knows that, that is absolutely true, right? So Robin, as you look at breakthroughs in mission to get to zero carbon by 2050 while ensuring access to clean, affordable energy, how do you tackle navigating different countries and environments that have different cultures, different approaches, recognizing that anything is done in one country is going to affect the entire global system?
Yeah, Vanessa, I think you really hit the nail on the head there in that we are dealing with a global problem, and what every country does matters in that overall effort. And yet at the same time, every country is very different and every market is very different. At the macro level, of course, you have different socioeconomic statuses, different resource mixes, different geopolitical concerns. And then, of course, if you're thinking about investing, in a given place, you have to think about the market and the regulatory environment in a very deep way. So our approach is sort of a variant on what Jamie was describing in terms of, trying to understand the customer. We are really trying to, meet, countries and governments where they're at, in terms of what they're ready to do. I think the key there, for us is really having local partners or, building the capacity locally, to work in a place, because you need people who understand the landscape, the players, and the political and socioeconomic context in which you're trying to operate, again, which can be very different country to country. One thing I've found in working at Breakthrough Energy is that, for example, the US and European governmental construct is very different in a lot of ways. So in Europe, you have not just the European Commission level government to work with, but then you also have member state interests that very much come into play. So, doing work there would definitely, in my estimation, not be possible or as productive as it's been if we didn't have colleagues in our Brussels office to work with, because I think we'd really struggle to know who are the right people to talk to, or the right partners to engage locally. That said, we are very much aware that while Breakthrough Energy is a global organization, we can't be everywhere at once. And again, that's where I think multilateral forums like Mission Innovation are so critical in our view, because what it does is it brings all the actors together in an organized way to really reduce the friction and complexity that happens when you are trying to tackle all of these very hard problems. And there are, dozens or, in some cases, hundreds of different stakeholders. So our hope is that, Mission Innovation can continue to be a place that companies, investors, philanthropy, and governments can come together to discuss integrated strategies around decarbonization, and then can help network players who may want to work together on specific problems in specific, places. So, we're hoping, of course, that we can do that in a much more fulsome way to cooperate in areas like technology innovation. I'll also say, though, I think, while Mission Innovation is, designed and built for purpose to do that, I also see a lot of need to cooperate in areas around things like regulation and standards to ensure that there's more, sort of seamless diffusion of innovation across borders. So a few, ideas there, but, to come back to your original question, there's a lot of heterogeneity, and therefore I think the big takeaway is you need a tailored approach that, meets your customer where they're at.
That totally makes sense. And I'm wondering, Jamie, if that resonates with you, because if you take a look at John Deere, one of the things I admire about you is you started your roots in the heart of America, but you're really trying to tackle ag at a global level. And so it ranges from work that you're doing very sophisticated farmers in the Midwest to tiny, tiny farms in Nigeria where many farmers are struggling. So how do you navigate these really different ecosystems, right? And it's not even just policy, but it's even fundamentally how they do farming is really different.
Yeah, it's a great question, and you're exactly right. Our customer needs, if you look at Brazilian farmers in the Cerrados broadacre farming, the Midwestern corn and soy rotation farmers, Western Canada and Australia with small grains, the list goes on. The variety that we deal with is tremendous, and the economic situation for each grower is very different depending upon where they're at geographically, what their crop production system is, and how mature their organization and their business is. And you probably expect this, but I'm going to give you a technology answer. Like, I really do believe that technology is the answer here, because the pace of technology, the speed at which technology is coming at us today, I think is part of the solution to that problem. It allows us to tailor solutions as are appropriate to different regions, to different customers with different needs. I'll give you an example. We introduced GPS guidance in agriculture almost 20 years ago now in the US market, followed soon in the European market. And it was a relatively expensive technology purchase for a grower, but they were attracted to it because the value proposition for them was real. It resulted in less waste in their operation, certainly a better quality of life for the farmer, much less stress in daily operation. But it was never a technology that was necessarily in the right price range for a grower in India or a grower in Africa or in China. And if you fast forward 20 years, the pace of that technology change has accelerated. Today the cost of that technology is much, much lower. And it's beginning to be interesting for it to enter into some of these markets that previously were just not in a location to accept the pricing associated with the technology or the cost of the technology. That pace, Vanessa, is quickening. Like, it's just happening on an accelerated time schedule with lots of different tech as compute power increases, both onboard and offboard machines, as global connectivity improves drastically in every corner of the globe. The technology that we can bring to bear in the agricultural case is immense, and it applies not just to the Midwestern high technology farmer anymore, but it can apply globally, right where an individual grower might sit, whether it be Africa, India, China, Brazil, doesn't matter. It's coming, and it's coming rapidly.
So, that's a good point, which is the evolution of technology and the role it's playing. But, we can look at some countries, they just don't have the access that we do. Like even basic Wi-Fi, right, is not going to be uniform across different countries. So what needs to be done to ensure that globally we are setting up countries for success, especially as technology is playing more of a role? Are we starting to widen the gap between the haves and have-nots? Because of the fact that technology is playing such a role? And are there things that, Robin, you've seen, or Jamie, that you guys are doing to help narrow that gap? Because to your point, technology is absolutely at the center of everything that we're doing.
Yeah, maybe I can start, and Robin, you can tag on. I think the answer is that there are certain foundational pieces of tech that we as a society need to support building out. And connectivity is, I think, the poster child for that. It doesn't just benefit agriculture, by the way. Connectivity in rural location benefits anybody who lives in those locations. Their quality of life improves. They have access to medical care and access to education, and all sorts of great things happen as a consequence of that. But along with it comes this benefit of connecting growers in an agricultural setting so that they can make better decisions for their farm that are result in more sustainable outcomes. And I think as society, we have an obligation to identify what those technology backbones are that are just part of the infrastructure. And I'll even use the term global infrastructure. And then each individual location has a responsibility to make sure that we invest in those globally to build out that infrastructure so that we can take advantage of the technology that I talked about.
And Robin, what about you? You've seen?
I think what the point Jamie just made is really interesting in that, there's obviously a lot that can be done in rural agricultural economies to do precision agriculture, for example. But as a prerequisite to do that, if you're going to try and hook up all of these sensors and have access to that data, you also have to have access to the internet. So there are all these kind of fundamental prerequisites that you need to address before you get to the, okay, well, what is the next level up from there phase? So I think it's an incredibly interesting topic because Mr. Gates in his book writes about the fact that he came to be interested in climate and energy really through an energy access lens, because through his work with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, they are very much concerned about, how do you address the fact that, almost 1 billion people, or at least up until recently 1 billion, I think now it's 750 million, something around there. That many people not having access to electricity is a huge issue in terms of, human well-being and the ability to be, to live a prosperous and, healthy life. So he got interested in it from that angle, but then realized, well, it's, important as we are providing energy access to ensure that the energy sources that we're using are cleaner, because we know most of the future emissions growth that, we expect, to come will come from places that are developing. And again, places that, will want the same standard of living we do, and rightfully so. So it is something that we're thinking deeply about. I think, to me, the most important factor is cost, right? These places have to be able to use clean solutions. We can't expect that, they'll be able to widely adopt things that are still fairly expensive. So, we think there is a big role for places like the United States to play in really driving the early innovation to bring the cost of the green premium down, such that new technology can be used in places like India that are developing. So that we think is a critical piece of the puzzle. Not to say, though, that there can't be great things that are done directly, by a country. We've seen, in Mexico, for example, one of the members of Mission Innovation, they've really made a big, ambitious commitment to invest in research and development within their country. So, we want to support both the sort of innovate in places like the United States and then diffuse technology model, and then also, work with governments around the world to, help them use their own resources and capacity to innovate as well.
Yeah, I think that's, super critical, and as I think about Department of Energy, we have an EJ40 initiative where we want to ensure that 40% of the impact that we are having in the work that we're doing is going to economically disadvantaged communities. And so this includes making sure there's access. And so we have a Indian Energy Group that's also looking at that, as well as work that's being done by the EJ40 team. So I think that's really fundamental. One thing that, Jamie, you had alluded to, which really resonates with me, is that the world's evolving at a speed that's even hard for us to see or imagine. I remember talking to someone who retired 15 years ago early. And the reason why was he said, look, it used to be when I was on business in China, I would get a fax and that's it. I might write a fax back. But when I was away, that was it, right? I was away. And now when I'm away, I'm doing meetings, right, during the entire time I'm awake. And then when I get home, when it's time to go to bed, I'm answering emails from halfway around the world. And so, business is much more challenging because now we're 24/7 and this clock speed of innovation is only increasing. So I think it's really changed the context of how we work and innovate. So wanted to, understand a little bit, Jamie, how you're thinking about things and how things have evolved at John Deere with this clock speed and the way in which you guys are doing work.
Yeah, I love the question, and I'll give you the same response that I tell my folks internally. There was a point in time where the skill sets that we sort of entered the business with were the skill sets that we relied on for the rest of our career, and that time's over. We are in a time period where we continually have to reinvent ourselves and reinvent the skills that are useful to developing the technology of the future. And I actually think that challenge is exciting. Like, that gets my creative juices going. And maybe a very practical example in that space, Vanessa, that's pertinent to the technology world is software is the new foreign language or another foreign language in our business, and you have to learn it. You have to be able to be conversant in multiple languages of software. You have to know where they're appropriate. You have to be able to utilize them to create the technology that's moving forward. And that's true in our business, not just if you're responsible for developing the software that goes on our machines and is evident to customers through a user experience, user interface, but it's also necessary for folks that are working in our factories so that they can write better automation capability to make the factory more efficient and less wasteful. It's true for folks that are working in our HR functions so that they can do better data analysis to better serve our employees. I think the world's at our fingertips once we understand how to code. And so for me personally, the developing software skills is one of those things that I take personally. So I'm actively learning Python at the moment. And I'm doing that not because I don't know any other languages, computer languages, but because that one's becoming prevalent enough in modern technology that I feel like I'm being left behind if I don't understand it and know how to make it work. And I also connect better with the folks that are really responsible for developing the great technology that Deere's developing at the minute. But I think that speaks to this broader need for us to be technology, the ability for us to understand technology. We don't have to be deep experts in it necessarily, but we have to be conversant with it. And I think that's just a growing need that we all have and a challenge that we should all take up.
Jamie, I'm just having this visual of you going in and debugging some Python code that one of your engineers like, move over, I got this. I now know how to do this. And
they know it far better than I do, Vanessa.
But the funny thing is I have vivid memories when I was a kid, and my mom had this stack of punch cards when she had her programs, and then I would use them as bookmarks and coloring and all that. And I'm not that old, but if you think about kind of where we've gone from punch cards over to coding, it's pretty crazy. So can you talk a little bit, Jamie, about any of the things that you're doing to upskill your workforce? Because the things that we learned in school even 10, 20 years ago are not the skills necessarily you need now. So how do you kind of in motion actually make sure that your workforce has the capabilities they need to keep up?
Yeah, I think maybe the best example internally for us is the effort that we're putting into training all parts of the organization in artificial intelligence, machine learning techniques. And so, that's we're taking the approach of a need to democratize the technology. So we want people to be able to utilize AI and ML wherever they might sit in whatever capacity they might serve, because the power of those advanced algorithms is that they can be applied in multiple use cases across multiple functions within our organization, not just in an end customer use case, but also internally. And actually what I've seen is that people gravitate to that, right? They want to learn new things. And so we have examples of folks that work in our factories that are taking Raspberry Pis and video cameras and connecting them together to identify visually what parts are coming into the factory and what real-time inventory looks like, right? That's awesome. And they would never have done that 2 or 3 or 4 years ago because the algorithms weren't democratized, the hardware wasn't available to do it. And today, it's a present reality.
Yeah, and I love this idea where, the democratization of education. I personally have had to go onto different sites to understand how they now teach multiplication, because they're doing it in a completely different way. And so, you can go and learn anything if you've got access to the internet, which I think is really, really exciting. Robin, talk to me a little bit about things that you've seen around ways that, across the globe, people are upskilling capabilities and really getting people prepared for the workforce. Because I think the traditional way of doing education, which is go take some tests and get A's in those, perfect SAT scores, and then off you go, is not really the reality of how one is successful. So are there models that you've seen around workforce development that you think are really preparing people on the fly to be prepared for this world that we're in right now?
Yeah, it's a super important topic, Vanessa. I think, one important element of this that I wanted to touch on is that, I think it's really important to be clear that, innovation isn't something that is confined exclusively to people in white lab coats that are, in STEM careers. Obviously, that is a big part of it, right? To ensure that we've got a, steady supply of new, breakthrough ideas, but you also need people, once the thing has been invented, you need people that can help construct the facility to, operationalize the technology. And then you need people after that in the sort of mid-skill domain to help operate the plant. So, that's something that I think is sort of lost in the conversation, but is really important to illustrating to people and convincing them of the value of investing in innovation, that it presents opportunities for many different types of people in the future. For the people who want to learn how to code and, build robots, great, but there are a lot of different ways to participate in the new economy. In terms of good models, Vanessa, that's a really good question. I think, one interesting model to me that is really, I think, much more of a thing in places like Europe than it is in the United States that I think needs to change is apprenticeships, right? Really giving people hands-on skills-based training and experience with new technologies. So I would love to see, and I know this isn't, something Secretary Granholm really cares about, us having a much more robust apprenticeship program around clean energy technologies that pulls in people from community colleges or historically Black colleges and universities, minority serving institutions, and helps them get hands-on experience with the things that we know are going to be very important, to our economy in the future. So just a few thoughts off the top of my head.
No, that's great. And I lived in Germany for a few years and totally agree on that. Apprenticeship model is really different in Europe than it is here. And us being very deliberate around how we do some of that workforce training, I think is really, really critical. Jamie, is there anything that you guys have done in John Deere in terms of how you evolved hiring or the kinds of people that you're bringing in, given the way that the workforce is evolving?
Yeah, we have started doing more apprenticeship programs, tying into the point that Robin made, and starting with younger people in the communities that we happen to have large facilities with. I think establishing that bond, and sometimes it starts with a STEM experience, right, in a school environment that often turns into, hey, I don't want to be an engineer, but I would love to go help John Deere create products in some other way. And so taking advantage of that and harnessing that innovation potential, I couldn't agree with Robin more. Like, innovation happens everywhere and sometimes in the places we least expect, right? Bicycle mechanics creating an airplane would be a great example, right? We really want to tap into that into the local communities that we serve and that we have operations in. And so that apprenticeship program, I think, is a really good way to attract talent early and to give them a purpose so they can see what that might look like as a career in the future, right? Even at a fairly young age, I think is really powerful. The other thing that we've done is really increased our footprint in and around, four-year educational institutions. The universities in the United States are a good example. Creating technology demonstration facilities in those locations so that we can attract students that are in those locations. And have them do productive, useful work without ever having to leave the confines of a college campus, right? They're working on Deere projects, right with shoulder to shoulder with Deere folks virtually in some cases, but they're doing meaningful work. And that gives them also an opportunity to shape their educational career. In particular, if they have that experience early in their educational career, they have an opportunity to pick different electives and maybe to take a different path educationally than they might have had without that experience. So those are just a couple of ways, Vanessa, that I think have been pretty impactful recently in us sort of improving the quality and the numbers of folks that we need in order to create the technology of the future.
That's fantastic. And last few minutes, I'm going to get personal, which is how I always like to end things. If you had to think about yourself, say 10 to 15 years from now, what are you personally doing to get yourself ready? Are there skills that you don't have today that you think you'll need besides Python programming? I'll start for myself personally. I've been astounded as a mom of a 12 and 15-year-old, how much information they get from social media. And so I'm really trying to understand the way the next generation is absorbing information, because I think the way in which they are educating themselves and learning is completely different than how even folks were doing it 10 years ago. And so I'm aspiring to learn more about how that entire universe works. Robin, what about you?
I think the media, piece is really important, Vanessa. Our, digital team has actually been teaching me how to effectively use Twitter. I was not aware until recently that there's a whole strategy around how to be a good communicator on Twitter, and that's obviously the preferred medium of choice for a lot of us folks here in DC. So I think that's a really good one. A couple things come to mind that I've been thinking about and working on. One of the really nice things about working somewhere like Breakthrough Energy is we're really thinking about this problem, of climate change in an integrated way. As I talked about earlier, thinking about technology markets and policy together. I obviously come from a policy background, but you do need to understand, some elements of finance and technology to understand, for example, what policies are needed in, the climate space. And I would argue, the opposite is true as well, that, finance and technology experts are starting to think much more deeply about policy as well. So it's just important to understand the problem overall. So, I'm eyes wide open that I will never be a finance expert, but I've really, enjoyed learning about that aspect of the problem. Another area that I've been doing a lot more thinking about is this area around emerging markets. As we discussed, this is where most of the future growth is going to happen, both in terms of emissions, but also in terms of just overall, opportunity. So, thinking about how we can be successful in partnering in places like, India or Chile, places that, are really trying to, step their game up on innovation and want to be leaders in this space. So that's another, area where I've started thinking about, okay, from a US perspective, how can we get more engaged in technology cooperation, cooperating on standards and regulation, working together, on, programs like Breakthrough Energy Catalyst. So that's another, area that I just think is so critical because, on the US side, we often think about domestic innovation, sort of in a vacuum, but it is deeply interconnected with the global problem. So, I think it's a really great question. I will, think about taking up Python, but no, no aspirations to actually be successful there. It definitely takes a certain type of personality and definitely a lot of patience to excel at that.
So Jamie, besides Python, I'm sure you're a man of many interests. What else are you pushing yourself on for the next?
I'm excited to send Robin a hacker rank test. See how she does. No, so there's just what my answer was pretty simple, Vanessa. I think COVID let the genie out of the bottle from a virtual work perspective. And so, if I sort of forecast and vision cast maybe 10 years in the future, I think remote work, like this virtual conversation that we just had, is probably, I don't know that it will take the form of sort of this 2D experience, right, with videos. I think it might actually be more holographic and more engaging and immersive in the future. And I think as I think about that, I think about the impact that could have from a Deere perspective with our customers. And could we have more of a presence in the equipment? Should we have more of a presence in the equipment virtually? We being Deere or the dealer? And what does that sort of user experience look like moving forward? And you can kind of let your mind wander with that. My brain immediately goes to tractors and Deere equipment, but it's really how are humans going to engage with anything in the future once it's connected and is sort of a system of systems.
So Jamie, having this visual of a little hologram of you on a dashboard on your tractor doing like Python integration as they're driving.
They'd find somebody much more photogenic than me to put there, trust me.
So thank you guys. That was a fantastic session. We covered everything from three-legged stools to Python coding to how we're going to retrain the workforce. I'm really excited about this conversation and the continued conversations that Mission Innovation is driving. So thanks to both of you. And I'm going to get cracking on coding right now.
Thanks, Vanessa.
Thanks, Vanessa.